see if it's working now. Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of A Cup of Joe. My name is Joe Escobedo, and with me today on the show is Tramaine. Thanks so much for being on the show, Tramaine.
Hi.
So Tramaine is the head of social at Great Group in Singapore. So really want to get your thoughts on what we were talking about a minute ago, which is getting local insights, understanding the local nuances, and then how do you adapt that for social media? So you're mentioning that one of the common questions that you get either from different people you work with is how do you take a regional strategy and really help adapt that to the local market? So let's say you have a regional plan for Asia Pacific. How do you break that down to say the Philippines and Thailand? So what is your approach for that?
So I think, so as I was saying, like a lot of clients have this whole, they want to go with it with a regional standpoint because they don't want to lose any of the context or some of the direction that the brand and vision of the company is heading towards. And that's exactly where you start. So at the core of your proposal, at the core of the marketing, if you stay true to what the brand vision and the product offering is, naturally that will then be adapted to the local markets and nuances. What it does need is a touch of local flavor. So working across a lot of regional brands before, there are always two kind of methods that people do it, where it's a decentralized, decentralized solution where everything is done kind of like a global or regional headquarters, and then the locals just execute it. There are benefits to that if you have a very generic product or something that's quite functional and less emotional driven, like maybe say toothpaste. Right, but if you've got something that's a bit emotional, like say the other beauty care products that requires a little bit more emotional drive, because maybe women in this market prefer these kinds of products because the weather is different, and I think so. But the driving force at the regional hub is we always try to stay true to what the brand vision, mission, values, and then the product offering. And then what does that mean for someone in Thailand? Maybe it's because say Thailand versus Singapore, right? Thailand very heavily influenced by influencers and people. A lot of products get marketed that way, and they go for the more emotional heartstrings, right? So what does that look like for an ad in Thailand? So then we will use the same offering of, say, if the toothpaste is about so in Thailand it's emotional, so maybe that when you see someone smile, that's beautiful, it lights up your day. So we talk about the emotional kind of like consumer takeout versus the functionality. But in Singapore, maybe we're less emotional about things like that. We want to know, well, which toothpaste is going to give me the brightest teeth if I have a lot of coffee. So then we will tweak the angle to maybe that it's a female, like it's a corporate person who likes to drink a lot of coffee, and then she's noticing stains on her teeth. So then the product offering is the same, but we just tweak the messaging to kind of match whatever local insight we have with that. Now that requires a lot of coordination between regional, where the entire kind of vision, the strategy is born, and then local markets have to go, well, what does this mean for us, and make that very fine-tuned and therefore rooted in insight and research. Basically, it's a tough one because to be honest, all of us go with that approach and with that good intention. Very often, it kind of gets diluted along the way for many reasons. But I do believe that also we shouldn't get too caught up in being too local. Do you know what I mean? There are some things that, if we try and overthink it, we might overcomplicate it. And then and then you go down the rabbit hole of going, well, what is this ad actually, or what was the usual concept of it to begin with? So there's a fine line, and I think that we as marketers continuously try to learn, because in social specifically, we might get very distracted by what's happening. What are the funkiest things, like TikTok, for example, where it was like at the height of the pandemic, that was the only platform everyone was talking about. But does it really match your brand? Did it really sell anything? And what was it actually used for? Very fine line.
No, it's a very good point that I think not a lot of people think about is how local should you actually go? Because obviously there is additional resources, investment that goes into localizing different marketing and advertising campaigns. So how do you really strike the balance, or how do you decide how much local versus how much regional you need to go in terms of your approach?
I think it boils down to the campaign and the objective of the campaign. So, for example, if you work on something like movies, where the title itself might already sell, so perhaps the local side to it is that ensuring that every piece of content we have has subtitles. because the movie is understood and the title's understood, but then the conversation and stuff, depending on how, because like in countries like say Philippines or Vietnam or Indonesia, not everyone is has the fortune of being English educated.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the local nuances. But we perhaps don't have to do a very, very local version of the film in terms of like actually taking the film and then shoot it with local stars, which I know is very, which is done quite commonly in say in a market like India, because they have that, they need that. So that's that fine balance. So it boils down to then, is this concept easily understood, or even maybe is this new to the market, and do we need to actually take into account some nuances or sensitivities with the concept that we're talking about. So I think that's that gap, and I think the team needs to make a decision, because someone needs to go, well, we get very caught up in the idea, and then we lose the kind of train of thought of the marketing vision or the business objective we're trying to achieve. The other thing to this is also, aside from the idea, is something that we should always consider: localized platforms. So perhaps the localization is not the idea, but is the distribution channels we're using. We're all very used to Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and YouTube as the global social platforms, which is fine. But there are some markets that are very, very kind of in tune, which is like your, like, so for example, Korea, there's Kakao, and then you've got Line in Thailand, your WeChat, right? So I think perhaps that is an avenue of localizing it. It doesn't always necessarily have to be a piece of content or the creative idea.
Okay, so that's not like there's a couple different ways to localize it. I guess the bare minimum is to do like translations, like localize, captions and subtitles. So the first one sounds like localizing the language. Second round could be localizing the idea or messaging. And the third one sounds around localizing the actual platform. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Am I missing anything from that list? That's the holy trinity of.
No. I think that's quite. I mean, we could go down many avenues within that list itself. But I think as a general form, yes, because then you give respect to the idea, but also to the market. Yeah.
I guess the question goes back to, how do you really understand the local nuances, as you were talking about? Because when you can look at statistics and say, Kakao is huge in Korea, but beyond that, what are some of the ways in which you better understand the local market, even if you're not based there?
I think so. There's several ways how I approach a kind of social media strategy when it comes to content. The first thing is desktop research. I mean, that's easy and it's quite quick, and and the thing is, statistics don't tell you the full story, but it gives you the fundamentals of what you're looking at. For example, platform penetration across the different sort of like countries, right? You get an understanding, and that's where you first get the first hint of, hey, you know what? Maybe Facebook isn't that big in that country. Like example, Indonesia, the first platform is actually YouTube, not Facebook. So then immediately I would be like, right, so we should distribute our content and media spend a little bit different already. And then you go into kind of like more desktop research about campaigns and what's worked well. Once you start doing the searching, you start to see where it comes up, and therefore like, oh, where are people using that? Then the next plan to this is actually about search data. So I work very closely with the data analytics team, and we have a look at search data. Now, when we do search data, then we start incorporating the language, because when I say, for example, I don't know, like gym is not a thing in Indonesia. It might be something else, maybe boutique, right? So then we start doing that. So those are the two first kind of like avenues where we get some sort of inside look into local. And obviously the last thing to do is work with your local offices, right? So we might not have, I'd say, a gray in every single Southeast Asian country. We actually do. But say you're working in a place where it doesn't.
Yeah.
Then, there's always a network of friends, or, LinkedIn is a great source of reaching out to people to speak to someone. And most professionals will give you 15 minutes to talk a little bit about what's happening in that country. So those are kind of the 3 stop points that I do before I can arrive at a way to decipher then, is this enough information? And then we move forward with, whatever it is we're doing.
That's a good point. I think not enough people really talk to other people in other languages. Like you said, I think they do mostly the first 2 things, which is like desktop research, and we look at search volume, keywords, but actually interact with someone. And as you said, statistics can only tell you so much. They really can't give you a deeper insight in terms of, preferences and tastes in local markets. So it's a good point in reaching out to people on LinkedIn just to better understand their market, and portraying, letting them know you're working on something and would love to get their ideas on that. So really good tip, I think, for anyone watching this. And I'd love to better understand your approach to desktop research as well. So, I mean, search volume, you talked about, you guys have probably your in-house, tools and analytics platforms. Are you looking at
Yeah.
like search volume, as in like Google search volume, and then you apply those high search relevant keywords to a social? Is that how you do it, or what do you mean by keyword research?
Um, So I do a bit of a combination. So when I kind of speak to the team, I will look at, obviously there's keywords, and the first round of kind of like data will be a volume of stuff that happens, right? From there, we will start to see content opportunities. And then compare it to kind of like a social audit, which you can also do on desktop research, to see what is missing, what complements the two. And very often you will find that there are little, like what we call white spaces where we can play in because that's not being touched upon. Or the second thing that happens actually is it debunks several myths. Because, sorry, should I switch off the notifications? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it has to be a combination. The thing is, you probably need someone that's quite switched on in terms of like type of keywords and things that you're looking for, because then that like a keyword list can be 10, could be 100, depending on what you're looking at, right? So you need to be quite specific in what we're after. So before going in there will be a hypothesis. For example, I want to understand what is, say, is pricing a factor when people talk about organic food, for example, right? And then it's organic food plus price plus whatever. And then you start to kind of create mini hypotheses. So we can't just go in there with like a top line thought, right? That needs to be something you're trying to prove, disprove, or trying to get to. And then that will form the basis. And then you can, and then whether is it looking at volume, whether is it looking at trends, or whether is it looking at topics, because then the data, your data team and the search team will be able to understand what exactly you're looking for.
That's a good point. And from there, how do you identify some of the white spaces? You talked about, looking at some of those keywords, obviously doing the hypothesis beforehand to see if that validates kind of your hypothesis, but how does that really unearth you talk about new opportunities? How are you, using that data to identify new opportunities?
Oh, that's like asking like chicks to the train. See? No, I mean, look, I think very honestly, I think it will be different for everybody. So how I work is I when you have different sources of data, and then looking at so analyzing. So I take two things, right? One, you have top line observations about the different data sources, your desktop research, search, social audits, right? You write your observations. From the observations across, give yourself no more than like 5 points on a slide and have a look at them across the slides. You will actually almost always find 2 or 3 commonalities. And that's when you realize, hang on a second, I can build an insight off of these two, because an insight becomes an observation that you can action upon, and that will start off your content strategy brief. There are times where we arrive very rarely at, say, nothing concrete. So then we go back to the drawing board, right? So there may be, so I think I wouldn't say mistake, but something that I think we as marketers, and we're driven to like always arrive at a point of decision or something, right? But maybe the point is there is nothing. Do you know what I mean? And that could be a white space. There is nothing done properly. Everything's been done, but there is no actual like sort of like concrete line of thinking that's through this, and maybe that is the space. Nothing strategic or mind-blowing or whatever it is has been done, and this is our chance to create something that is of that path. So sometimes the negative is a positive, and I think we forget that sometimes. So it's like in the presentation or in a slide, right? I always tell my team, if there is nothing more to say, don't say anything. If there's nothing to say, you know what? I have nothing. I really have nothing. And you're like, hey, but that is then that first point to go on. Well, if we have nothing, then it means 2 things. One, there really is no information on this, which is great. It means that no one has done anything kind of like, out there in the space and social. But if there is nothing, but there's a lot of information, it means there's a lot of clutter. How do we break through the clutter? And it arrives at the same thing. We need to do something that breaks through everything and that creates an impression. So the entire thing becomes your white space. So the negative is something that we don't look at, and it's something that I encourage more people to look at.
That makes perfect sense. And I'm going to ask you another question. I don't know if it's too much of the tricks of the trade. You talk about cutting through clutter, because that's something they always ask me about. Everyone and their mother is creating content nowadays. A lot of it looks pretty much very vanilla, and I've given some ideas in terms of doing this, at looking for inspiration outside of the social media platforms. Like, I wrote a post recently that I don't go to LinkedIn for LinkedIn inspiration anymore. I just stopped doing it.
Okay.
Because I wasn't getting inspiration. It's the same thing over and over. So what I've done is I've looked at the platforms that do it very, very well. So I'm looking for design inspirations. I'm looking at Behance, which is like a design
Okay.
platform all creatives use, because that's specifically what it's used for. Only creatives hang out there. They showcase their best works. And for me, it's helped, broaden my horizon in terms of the avenues I look for inspiration, rather than scrolling through LinkedIn and saying, what's new here? Because at the end of the day, a lot of it is very much the same. So I've started looking for outside sources of inspiration, and finding out how I can tie that back into, a LinkedIn post, for example. I don't know if you've taken a different approach to that, or what your thoughts?
So it's very funny. I would tell so everyone that knows me personally and professionally will say, "How come you're not always on social?" I'm just like, I mean, you can find me, but I'm not constantly like posting. And actually, my team always goes, "Oh my God, have you checked out this new trend?" I'm like, no. Like, how are you head of social? I was like, listen, I don't have to be on the platform to understand how it works.
Yeah.
So 100% to your point, I actually stopped going online on the actual platform to look for inspiration, because I do go on there to double check if my idea has been done.
Yeah.
But I don't actually use that as a point of inspiration, because a couple of reasons. One, when we approach a brief, I think one of the things that we need to remember is we're not the target audience. And sometimes we get very caught up on the platform and absorbing that, this is a great idea. I go, I know it is. But to link back to what we're doing, sometimes there is no link. It's just a great idea. And we don't know what went behind that idea. So, I mean, this goes into a broader question about case studies, by the way, which I have such a strong point of view of. But sticking to the question, so inspirations and kind of like how do you approach it, right? I don't really use the platforms. No, I always think about a couple things. One, I'm probably never the target audience, and even if I was, I'd be very skewed because I'm a marketer and I know the brand inside out.
Yeah.
Okay. Two, in terms of like content, right? I think two things I feel like we need to do more of and bear in mind is, what are we trying to achieve with what we're pushing out there on this platform? And what is the consumer takeout of that? And the takeout is not necessarily what we're trying to achieve, because those could be two different things. What we're trying to achieve might be just create awareness that a new brand has launched, or build an e-commerce, social commerce kind of link. But the takeout is, I will buy this product from Facebook. Or the takeout is, I am now aware that this new brand is there. So two different things, because it will one, it will craft the content strategy, and two, it will craft the media and channel mix next to it, right? Which needs to go hand in hand quite powerfully. So I think those are things that people kind of miss. I'm giving a bit of trick of the trade, but it's a basic approach that I think we sometimes forget, or get lost in, whatever else that we see online. So to your point, going to LinkedIn for inspiration. I mean, I like looking on social feeds as like a news feed. Like, it's nice to kind of know what's happening, and this brand tried this, this brand tried that. Whether have I taken actual inspiration and things from there to do something? Probably very, very rarely, actually.
I'm glad to hear that. Sounds like I'm not alone. I think I try to and you bring a very good point in terms of realizing that you are not the target audience a lot of the times. I'm very fortunate that I sell to a lot of marketers, so I understand their pains very, very clearly. But to give you an example, we started doing more employer branding, which is dealing with HR, and I have zero HR experience. It's not doing interviewing and hiring people, but that's the extent of my experience in that field. So what I have been doing is trying to constantly, going back to your point earlier, interview people who are in that space, and better understand what are their challenges, what are the type of content they enjoy, because I can tell from my point of view, but it's going to be very, very different from the stuff they struggle with, and I don't have a deep enough understanding of it. So I spend a lot of time speaking with people, interviewing them to understand, what kind of content they enjoy and what are some of the pain points or challenges they have. So
I mean, and the thing is, the one thing I also think, sorry, just to add to that, is people often forget, like, you might like this content, but does your target audience actually like it too? Like, maybe it's a great idea in your head. It's always a great idea when we think about it, because we get very inspired and we're very like, oh my God, that's a great idea. And then when we sit down and you start to map it out, you're like, hang on a second, would they like it? Like, do they care? It's really funny, and this is like a rude thing that I do. Every time my team comes to me with like a report or something, and I say, why would I care about this? Why would I care about this piece of content? What is it? How is it affecting my life? Right? In the scheme of the content objective and the takeout. If it doesn't, then why do we have it there? So talk about clutter, right? Very often because there's clutter is because it's purposeless content. I think, I was reading up on it's a social media strategist, I can't remember, I think out of Canada. And I think he said something like, without strategy, content is just stuff. And the world has enough stuff.
Yeah.
And I couldn't agree more, right? And this is what it is. And so, and if we don't need to add stuff, we need to add solutions, right? Because that's what the consumer cares about. How are we either solving something, adding something value to their lives? If not, they wouldn't bother engaging with us. And the thing about this is because with social media, the power has shifted from brands to consumers. It's no longer about what we want to say anymore. And I think that is, again, social media has been around for like a decade or more, but I think there are still a lot of marketeers or people that struggle with that notion because we get caught up in the whole, I think it's a great idea. But is it really a great idea? And put it to the test.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think every entrepreneur can definitely relate to that. We always think we have the best ideas, and then you go out and validate.
Yeah.
Like, that's a terrible idea. That's way off. It's like, shit, I thought that was brilliant. So as an entrepreneur, yes, you can definitely relate to coming up with a lot of, ideas, but then not even knowing it's a good one without, like you said, validating it, talking to the audience to say, is this something that's going to impact in a positive manner? If not, I'm just creating ideas or products or businesses just for the sake of it. And as an entrepreneur, you never want to do that. So I love that you're taking that approach and asking those questions, because I don't think enough people ask those questions. I see a lot of brands who, to your point, just put out stuff because they feel like they have to put out stuff for the sake of putting out stuff.
Exactly.
Like, stop it.
I know. Even as a consumer, you go, and you know what? The thing is, I understand that it's hard to ask questions that are a bit pushy or whatever, but there are different ways to ask the same question, right? It's about then understanding that presentation dynamic and the question with your client. And once you have that rapport, you can go like, right, why are we doing this? Like realistically, right? And if you put it towards them, like, I'm trying to make your money work harder with lesser stuff, isn't that better? Because then with every dollar, you can get an X amount of return, whether it's in a brand uplift or an actual sale. And we can demonstrate that if we actually build the right infrastructure in place. And the whole mix between content and creative and media becomes even more important nowadays because there is so much stuff out there.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. So.
Absolutely. I'm almost tempted to get into case studies, but I think we might go down a rabbit hole because I have a lot to say about that as well.
Awesome. We can table it.
Yeah. We may have to do that for another session because I think a lot of my clients are doing it and they're just putting them out. I've only seen one or two good ones, which I've led recently to one of my clients, but most of them are just the same cookie cutter stuff. So maybe, like I said, if people are watching and they want to hear more about case studies, we can definitely do another one on that, because I think you and I can probably go for us.
We can have a proper debate on this.
Yeah, I think we have a proper debate on that one. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that one next time. So Tramaine, thank you so much. I've had a blast.
Thank you for having me.
Catching up. I'd ask, how can people get in touch with you, but you're not on social?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so
Okay.
as long as I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on social, but I'm just more private with that stuff. But LinkedIn, 100%, you can get me there.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I highly encourage people to follow you on at least LinkedIn, connect with you there. So thank you so much, Tramaine. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Joe.
And if you enjoyed today's interviews, please feel free to share it with anyone who might find it helpful. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Take care and stay safe, everyone. Bye.